Welcome to the program. I'm Mark Imperial. This segment's being brought to you by booksgrowbusiness.com. It's the place where professionals and entrepreneurs publish to grow their businesses and to leave a legacy. We're doing a series of business spotlights across the country and in your town, remarkable people, places, and things, and business owners and professionals. Joining me on this segment is Tim Woods with Tim Woods Game Mastery. Tim, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark. Great to be here.
Tim, tell us about Tim Woods Game Mastery, and specifically, who do you help?
Absolutely. So the idea is that there are so many people nowadays, especially who are very interested in role-playing games. Games like the probably best known example is Dungeons and Dragons. And when people kind of go online and try to find ways to get access to these role-playing games, how can they get started? There are a lot of options out there, but the one thing that a lot of people run into is the idea of running these games can seem very intimidating. And that's where I kind of come in. I am a professional game master, a professional dungeon master in the case of the game Dungeons and Dragons, and I kind of show up, or in the case of lately, do Zoom events with people where for your company, for your family, for your school, for your kids, I can get together a game where I introduce to new players the game Dungeons and Dragons. And especially nowadays when I think social time has become such a premium, it's something that people are really appreciating getting to do, both as kind of like a break from other forms of activity and a way to socialize when that's not so easy nowadays.
So when is the point when people find that they need help from someone like you, when they're just starting to get into the game and they don't even know where to start, or how do they find you?
You know, there are a lot of people who are experienced players who are kind of just like, I'd like to do this the easy way. I'd like to bring in somebody who really I know is going to provide a fun product. But I'd say 90% of the people who reach out to me are people who are very new to the hobby, are kind of discovering D&D, or maybe even rediscovering it after having been away from the hobby for a while, but they're really not sure where to get started. I say there's the beginner box, there's these books you can buy, but for some people, that's not the easiest way to get in. The easiest way would be to have a friend, somebody who can really introduce you and walk you in, but not everybody has that friend. And if you don't have somebody who's on hand who really knows the rules, knows how to introduce the game properly, it can be a little bit difficult. It can be a little intimidating. So I think mostly people who are kind of at the beginning of their D&D journey, who want that entrance into the hobby to maybe be a little bit easier than it could be otherwise.
Tim, as a professional game master, how do you market your business as a game master? Like, how are you where the people are looking for you so they can find you to begin with?
I've been very lucky because I've gotten a little bit of media attention that has largely kind of put a lot of people into my lap, where I don't really do too much outreach beyond kind of word of mouth advertising. There's lots of contact between the parents that I run games with and the schools that I run games with. And there's been a lot of kind of cross-pollination that way. But for the most part, it's just people who are, going online and trying to be like, okay, I understand that D&D is this type of game, but how would I get into it? And then they end up stumbling across me for the most part.
Now, I know during the pandemic, I know console games have blown up and exploded because we're spending a lot of time at home. I'd imagine similars happen in the role-playing games. Tell us how the pandemic's affected your business and what you've seen out there.
It's been an interesting situation because yes, console games have definitely blown up. Role-playing games are going through an odd shift where I would say, yes, they're more popular now, but generally speaking, what tabletop role-playing games have always literally brought to the table is this idea of getting to sit around physically with your friends, maybe not so much focused on a screen as you are in the kind of social aspects of getting to play together. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of people, it's been a real hit not getting to have that kind of a physical space sharing that is very much what D&D and role-playing games bring. But I do think that right now there are probably more people playing D&D than ever, thanks to programs like Zoom and Roll20 and websites like that facilitate D&D play online. My business personally has definitely blown up since the pandemic, for better or worse. I have a lot of people reaching out who are pretty eager to get some kind of gaming in that is not just the primarily solo console gaming that they might get otherwise.
What's that experience like working with you? Because I'm imagining, since it's, D&D is an in-person game and now you can do it on Zoom, are you carrying the board and you're mastering the board for everybody? What does that look like?
Generally speaking, with newer players, I'll try to do my best to cut out the board entirely. When we're playing a digital game, that aspect of it is really something that it can be viewed as extraneous and not necessary for learning the core elements of gameplay. For the groups that I've been running for a long time, where they really do enjoy the nuance of kind of moving around the battlefield, moving those miniatures around the board, we can't really do that as easily, but there are websites like Roll20 where they essentially fulfill the role of the map, where you can kind of upload all these icons and stuff. And Roll20 is what I use when I'm running a lot of my professional games right now. It is a bit of an annoying thing that I have all these miniatures, can't do anything with them, but it's nice to have these useful digital substitutes, as it were.
Gotcha. Tim, so how did you get started as a game master? What inspired you and what got you to start helping others with the games?
Yeah, I've always been interested, definitely in all different kinds of games. And when I was very young, I kind of stumbled across, in like the early days of the internet, this game called Dungeons and Dragons, where there was a solo adventure. And as I read through it, I'm like, oh, so you could run through this adventure, or you could run through any other kind of adventure, or you could make up your own. You can make up your own monsters. You can make up your own characters. Wait, this is like Legos. You can do anything with this. And from that moment on, I was hooked. I was in love with role-playing games and the kind of creativity that they offer. And I think for a lot of my youth, I was very aware of this idea that lots of people love role-playing games, but the amount of people who get to spend the time playing them, they are, in terms of comparison to maybe some other games like board games and especially video games, there's a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot of upkeep to these games that goes on behind the scenes. And I really love the aspect of these games that was the creative aspect, that was the upkeep, but also recognize many people don't get to play it as often as they like. And I was kind of one of those people too, I was observing. So I really sought to find a model for how could people play these games more often? What would that take? And I very much saw the lack of game masters in the community as being such a big problem, that if somebody were to step in and fulfill that, there'd be a lot more games in the world, especially games for kids, people who are traditionally underserved, who don't feel like they always have access to that hobby, people who are just feeling like they don't have that one friend who will bring them in. And stepping in and getting to fulfill that role was something that was rewarding for me, because I got to play more D&D, but it felt rewarding because I knew I was bringing the hobby to other people who would have maybe never encountered the game. When I was working a lot of retail work at comic book shops and stuff, where I saw people who would buy D&D, but then I also saw people who were like, well, I don't have a friend who would teach me the game, so I guess I'll never play it. And once you see that happen, usually once a day at shops like that, you start to realize there's a pattern, and where there's a pattern, there's an opportunity.
Right on. Tim, before I ask you my last question, for those folks who are new to the idea of working with the game master, how does that even, how do you work with them? And is it, how do you charge? What's the fee for something like this for your service?
You know, it depends on the exact nature of the game. Typically, I'm charging somewhere for a 3-hour game in the range of 300 to 500, depending on the situation. For corporate games, for large scale games, sometimes it's more than that. But I'm sorry, the first half of your question was what again?
Just wondering what that experience is like working with you. Like, where do you start?
Absolutely. I like to think that especially with new players, I try to get into the game as quickly as possible. Something that I know that sometimes alienates people from the hobby is feeling like, oh, you need to make a whole character beforehand. That's not necessarily true. You can dive in and be playing D&D in 10 minutes or less. And that's usually my goal. Is a lot of what you need to learn to play, you can learn while you're playing. And for the people who are kind of, well, I've heard of D&D, maybe I do want to give it a shot, I'd like to say it's easier than you think it is, and I try to make it as fun and painless as possible. You're just, before you know it, rolling dice, kind of trying to see what the results are, having fun, laughing at the results that you get, and then making up creative solutions to problems. And I like to think that people who don't necessarily think they're going to have fun with D&D, in my games, they're having fun in surprising amounts of time. And then in a 3-hour session, you're, by the end of it, coming away with an idea of like, oh, so that's what D&D is. This is a blast.
Fantastic. Tim, for my audience out there that are connecting with you and would love to learn more and perhaps work with you, how do they find you?
The best way to find me is definitely my website. That's timwoods.com, Timm, woods as in forest.com. And from there, you can get all my contact info. You can read all the reviews, all the information I've uploaded about myself, see photos of my games and things like that. And that would be the best way to reach me for sure.
Tim, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate learning a little bit about your business, and I appreciate you taking the time and sharing with my audience. I wish you continued success for you and for all of your clients.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mark, for having me. I appreciate it.
Tim Woods from Tim Woods Game Mastery. This segment's been brought to you by booksgrowbusiness.com. It's the place where professionals and entrepreneurs publish to grow their businesses and to leave a legacy. That's all for now. Join me on my next episode and next Expert Spotlight. I'm Mark Imperial. Take care.